Hello and welcome to the October 2025 Move to France Q&A. My name is Allison Grant Lounes. I am the author of Foolproof French Visas. I am the owner of the relocation agency Your Transformation, where we help people to get the right visa and do the right French admin to follow their dream of creating a successful and sustainable life in France. I host the group Americans in France on Facebook. I host the podcast Profiles in Transformation and do a lot of other things to serve the community of Americans living in France. Now, I have been doing this type or some type of relocation work for about 10 years. I briefly worked in taxes, and my knowledge of the visa and relocation process comes largely from helping hundreds and thousands of Americans for initially for free on Facebook and also from learning about taxes during that particular job. So, we're going to go ahead and get started with your questions. Hi to Portugal and Colorado and Washington State and London and all of those things. Were any of you on the Living the French Dream event last week with Frenchly? We were the sponsors of this Frenchly event. So yeah, looking forward to getting to know those of you who learned about us from that event. Very happy to see you here. And hopefully we will get to some of your questions. We have a lot to get through today, as usual. So I'm going to start with the questions that were pre-submitted. Just as a reminder, this is a free event. The idea is for people to get to know us a little bit, get to understand the issues related to relocating to France, understand how their relocation might be impacted by different things, and of course, get to know us if you're interested in working with your transformation on your relocation. So if you have a lot of questions, I do offer individual 1 hour consultations that are paid, and that we can really dive a little bit deeper into your particular visa situation, your timeline, what your questions are, go over the whole process. And then from there, if it's a good fit to work together and when you're ready to get started, we can send you a proposal for one of our service packages and things like that. So, without further ado, I will start off with our questions. Jerry, we are thinking about renting an apartment to get the relocation process started, then spend a couple of months there, keep the rental, return to the US to do the visa application. Is this feasible? What's the best way to handle the finances with this approach? So, it's totally okay if you want to come to France and rent an apartment before you actually do the visa process. A visa is not required for getting a long-term rental in France, so it is very dependent on the landlord in terms of whether or not they're able to rent to you, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker if you don't have a visa. That being said, what we typically advise is that you do the visa, you get a temporary place to stay, like an Airbnb for 4 to 6 weeks, and spend that time looking for the long-term apartment during those 4 to 6 weeks. To me, it doesn't really make sense for you to spend time on a scouting trip, like trying to secure a long-term rental, because it will be much more straightforward when you're already here with the visa. Okay, Mindy, is it true that we have 1 year to sell our home in the States free of capital gains tax in France? So, according to the accountant who did a webinar with us last year, that was one of the questions that got asked. And that was the answer that he gave is that if you are selling your US property, that was your primary residence as part of a relocation, then as long as it happens sometime in the first year, the French tax office doesn't really care. But if you rent it out, if you make it a commercial property, if you hang on to it for a long time before you sell it, one, if it's in a sticky tax state like California, it can give California, for example, a reason to continue to consider you a tax resident. I see that you're in New York, not California, but we often have people from California on these calls. If you hang on to it for several years, the US will no longer consider it your primary residence when you sell, and France no longer will either. So, definitely important to consider the sale of your US property and the timing of that as part of the relocation process. I wanted to go ahead and get extra copies of documents with apostille for administrative purposes when we arrive, but I read somewhere the birth certificate needs to be within 30 days. I don't know where you read that, but that is wrong. In a couple of cases, the birth certificate will need to be less than 3 months or 6 months, but for most purposes, especially when you arrive, you don't need an apostille if it's a US issued document, and you're not going to you're not going to need a whole lot of copies. Like I would have maybe one extra copy, but you're only ever going to be giving a photocopy to somebody and not the original document. So, not necessarily a reason to have a ton of originals on hand. Susie, when applying for Puma, my birth certificate will not match my passport or visa. I was married and took my husband's name, which I still use, and then was divorced. So you will need your marriage certificate and your divorce certificate. Or if you don't have a divorce certificate, sometimes there's a divorce judgment. If it's a lot of pages, then really just a page or two that relates to you keeping your name after the divorce. And we will include that in the healthcare package. Narissa, I need to know what visa will be right for me as a young disabled professional. I want to further advance my art skills and attend a good art school. Okay, so if you enroll in an art school that is accredited and an academic program of at least 20 hours a week, then you can qualify for a student visa. The tricky thing about that is that if you want to then continue to live in France at the end of your studies, you will have to, first of all, do a degree program of at least 2 years that qualifies you for a recherche d'emploi création d'entreprise status, which gives you a year to look for a job. And two, you'll need to then transition to some type of work visa status in order to live in France long term. Now, that could very well be a passeport talent profession artistique, so being self-employed and having multiple different types of contracts as a self-employed artist, or some type of work in the art industry related to your degree. Is there affordable housing for low income? Unfortunately, not for people who are just arriving with a visa. So it's going to be very difficult to find low income housing. You typically have to take what you can get. Not to say don't have a budget, but most of the landlords for the little 10 square meter studio places where the rent is 5 to 600 euros a month in Paris, I don't know what it is elsewhere. Those are going to be very hard to come by and be difficult to secure if you're just newly arrived in France and you don't have any French income or documents. Do they accept SSI, SSID in France? Not sure who you mean by they, but in terms of proof of financial resources for the visa application, yes, it would be considered similar to Social Security and should be accepted without an issue. If you're referring to landlords, they certainly can accept it, but you'll probably still need some type of rental guarantee policy like Garant Me, which will take foreign income into account for providing you with a rental insurance policy. Gianni, what is the average total cost for relocating from the US to France, including the use of a broker or a relocation assistance? That is a big question. We have people do it by themselves and spend the cost of a plane ticket and maybe an extra suitcase. And there are people that we have a couple of clients who are spending multiple tens of thousands of dollars to take their belongings and take their pets over and to fly on one of the pet charter flights and all of that. So somewhere between $1,000 and $50,000 would be the correct answer to that question. Now, if we want to get a little bit more specific, if you're going to be renting, then you have to consider that your upfront costs are going to be typically 2 months for a security deposit and 1 month and your first month's rent. You can look at various websites like Se Loger and Le Bon Coin to see rental apartments or rental properties in the areas where you're looking and determine approximately what your monthly rent budget should be for the size of the property you want. If you're buying, then you should again do the same thing for properties for purchase. Typically, you want to factor in 8 to 10% for notaires fees and agency fees and things like that. If you want to use a buyer's agent, that's going to be in the 2 to 3% range, again, depending a little bit on the size of the property that you're going to be buying. Now, a buyer's agent works for you and finds the types of property that you want to buy, which is different from the seller's agent, which list properties that are available for purchase. And again, in terms of relocation assistance, we can provide a quote for a particular package. And yeah, there are some people who do sort of ad hoc admin help for 20 bucks an hour and you kind of get what you pay for. Or there are companies that are even they're more expensive than we are and that charge tens of thousands of dollars and don't necessarily do a better job, or definitely don't do a better job. So again, really, really depends. And I encourage you to think about what your budget is globally and what all of the different costs are. And I think we do have a little bit of a section in Fast Track to France that encourages you to think about all the different parts of the process from what your monthly rent and utilities will be to all kinds of other stuff. What's the minimum monthly amount a person currently receiving Social Security disability needs in order to relocate to Paris and live comfortably? Somebody is considered, a single person is considered rich in France with 3,800 euros per month net of income, meaning 3,800 euros per month after taxes. So again, there are people who want to live in a three-bedroom apartment and the rent is going to be 3,000 euros a month, and you want to live in the seventh, and that's what the type of life that you want to have. When I first moved to France, I was paying 300 euros a month for 8, 9 square meter studio, and I babysat for the family that rented it to me to pay for the rent, basically. And that was, I don't think you could find anything like that now. That was over 15 years ago. So, very wide range of possibilities in terms of rent and costs. And you have to decide what living comfortably means to you and do your research accordingly. Chloe, I will be staying in France for 3 months from November 2026. Can I do work as a consultant if I am paid by invoice once I am back in the UK? So if you are a tourist in France, then technically you're not supposed to work, but also if you're working on your laptop and you don't have a visa and you're not going to be here long enough to have tax implications, then who's going to know? That being said, if you're moving to France to reside, that is not a good idea. What sort of visa do I need if I am only paid by dividends? If you are an investor in a company and you receive dividends, then that is passive. If you are doing work for a company and the company is paying you dividends instead of paying you salary to avoid registering in France and paying French social charges, then you're probably going to have tax problems in France with your foreign company being reclassified as a French company and being taxed like a French company. So that is not a practical solution. Depending on the income level, there are a couple of different structures that we could come up with to sort of legitimize you working in France and justify you getting a visa for working here. So that would be something I would want to have a conversation about and understand what your income is, how much money are you going to be making per year? Do you have the potential for other clients? Is your company willing to have you on as a contractor or pay a foreign company? There are lots of different solutions, but yeah, working for a foreign company and only getting dividends, not totally the best one. Shannon, please share your thoughts on relocating to Set, specifically houses for long-term rental availability in expat community. I have never been to Set. I can speak on some of the major cities in France, but I don't know like every single particular small town everywhere, unfortunately, yet. So I would encourage you to look at Facebook groups for the Montpellier area at the rentals that are available there and to go onto websites like Se Loger and Le Bon Coin to see what the rental availability is. I know that we have a lot of clients in the Montpellier to Carcassonne region. There's another relocation agency that also works down in that area around Montpellier and in the Hérault generally, and they have a lot of people down there. Like they work very locally, whereas we work with everybody all over France. So, there's definitely quite a large English-speaking community in Montpellier and the surrounding area. Estelle, how and processes of the Entrepreneur Profession Libérale visa? So the visa type requirements and processes are covered in foolproof French visas, but I can give you a brief overview. So you have to put together a business plan, 3 years of financial projections, and typically they're looking for evidence that your activity is going to be successful in France, which means having clients, having more potential clients, having networking opportunities, and being able to show that you have business reasons for being in France. So depending on, you know, what your network looks like and what your services are and what type of business you're opening, you want to start thinking about, how are you going to make sure that this business is successful in France? Now, once you arrive in France with that visa, there's no particular requirement to have clients in France. Like they don't really care where the income is that you're invoicing and paying taxes on, like after you get to France and register your business. But for the visa itself, like the initial application, they want to make sure that you have potential business reasons for being in France. Business registration license. I'm not sure what that means. If you have a regulated profession, then you would need to get authorization from the relevant French professional organization before you're allowed to practice that activity in France. Otherwise, there's a couple different types of business structures, and the business structure is going to depend on the level of income you have, the level of expenses you have, your long-term goals for how you want to build the business, and how much complexity you want, because sometimes you end up paying, if you have a business that has 75,000 euros of income, you could register as micro entrepreneur and pay the 26% social charges roughly if you have a service activity that has 26% social charges. You could also register an actual company and deduct business expenses and potentially have 40% social charges, but on the net, that is coming to you as owner's compensation. So it depends a little bit on what your goals are. And obviously, when you are registering an actual French company, that adds a lot of layers of complexity in terms of accounting and administrative requirements that are much less onerous in the micro when you have a micro entrepreneur activity. So potentially lower social charges, ability to deduct expenses, et cetera, but you're paying for that in needing an accountant from the beginning, needing bookkeeping services, having to deduct expenses, keeping receipts, all of that stuff. Sandra, what is the best visa for retiring to France? If you are retiring to France and you do not have a French pension, you are going to apply for a visitor visa, excuse me, a long-term visitor visa. Now, a lot of people will refer to this around the internet as a VLSTS. Now, VLSTS refers to Visa de Long Séjour, valant titre de séjour. So it is a 12-month visa that gets validated into a titre de séjour and then can be renewed into a carte de séjour. And so VLSTS actually refers to almost a dozen visa types. And the one that you would want as somebody retiring to France would be a visitor. Occasionally, some people will also get a temporary visitor visa, which is not renewable. And that's best if you don't intend to stay, aren't going to register for the French healthcare system, are not going to exchange your driver's license, don't want to renew your visa, don't want to deal with French taxes because you're really just going to be on vacation for a year. How do you obtain health care? If you are retired in France, then you're going to have 3 months. First of all, you're going to need to have a temporary healthcare policy before you apply for your visitor visa. For that temporary policy, it needs to be valid for 365 days in the entire Schengen space, 30,000 euros of coverage, zero deductible, includes repatriation. So you'll get that policy for 1 year at the time of your visa appointment or a couple days before your visa appointment. We always send 3 quotes to our clients when we're preparing the visa application so you can compare the different options and make sure that the policy you're getting is the appropriate amount of coverage for you and compare prices a little bit. You do have to be careful because there's not a lot of policies that exist. Sometimes you can get sort of shepherded into a travel insurance policy, which is often for trips up to 90 days within 365 days, and that is not what you want. The other thing, too, is that the prices can vary widely based on the broker. So you could get a quote from one company for 600 or 700 euros for the policy, and then the same policy sold by another broker. They add in a larger brokerage fee, so they're charging you 1,800 euros, but it's not necessarily a different policy or better than the lower one. So you really need to compare very closely. So that's before you get the visa. Then when you arrive in France with your visa, you're going to be able to register for the healthcare system starting 3 months after you arrive in France. So during those 3 months, you need to make sure that you find a long-term lease in your name, put bills in your name, get the electricity, the water, the fixed internet line, all of those things, get them in your name. And then after 3 months, you're going to send off your application to the healthcare system, include your birth certificate, marriage and divorce certificates, name change papers, proof of where you've been living for the past 3 months, proof of your visa being validated, whole pile of documents. You send it off to the healthcare office in your department, and then they are going to process that paperwork. And what they do is they set up like basically a French birth certificate for you in the system to identify you. And once they have done that, then they are going to send you an attestation that you are covered by the French healthcare system and request a photo and a signature for creating your carte vitale. Now, when they first receive the paperwork, if your application isn't complete, like they notice, oh, your birth certificate doesn't match your passport, then they're going to send everything back to you, or they'll send a letter back to you and say, hey, you have to send us this thing. And it's really important that you respond to those quickly, because if you don't, then you're going to have to start the whole process over. Also, you need to really focus on getting the healthcare documents in as soon as you are eligible, because you will need proof of being on the healthcare system or having healthcare coverage at renewal. And so we don't want you to end up in a situation where you have to also pay for a second year of a private healthcare policy because you were not diligent in the admin of getting your documents in on time. Charlotte. I've read about the rejection of citizenship for those whose income does not originate in France. Are they also rejecting people who seek permanent residency for that reason? I'm American and can't originate my Social Security in France. Okay, so if you are on a visitor visa and the majority of your income is foreign source, you cannot count on having a path to residency and naturalization. And the truth is that some of these media outlets are acting like this is a new thing, and there have been articles about it. I think there are more rejections now, but this has actually been going on for a very long time, and it was covered in the very first edition of Foolproof French Visas, which came out in 2019. So, while it's true that people now are getting rejected, or we're seeing more publicly shared stories of rejections for people applying for residency and naturalization who are retired and who don't have French income sources and who don't necessarily pay French tax, it's not really a new thing. And one of the things that Foolproof French Visas describes in each section for each different visa type is, does this lead to a path to residency or naturalization? If not, what changes can you make to your visa status in order to get a path to naturalization? So, student, you have to switch to something earning money. Like you have to switch from a student visa to a salaried work visa, or become self-employed and earn more than minimum wage, et cetera, before you can apply for residency or naturalization. You cannot go, even if you're a student in France for 5 years, you cannot go from student to 10-year resident card without passing through something else. If you have a French work contract and you're making a good salary, but you're a salarié en mission that's been sent to France from another country, you don't have an option to get a 10-year card or apply for naturalization. What you do have is an option to switch to a regular Passeport Talent Carte Bleue Européenne, like a European blue card salaried job, or a regular sponsored salaried position before you can apply for and have that for a couple of years before you apply for either of those things. Now, with the visitor, it's tricky because at that stage of your life, you're not going to be going out and looking for French jobs. And the thing is, like, you also don't need a 10-year residence card, because the 10-year residence card, what does it do? It enables you to work without restriction and be self-employed or go get a different kind of job or whatever. And same thing for naturalization. Whereas the French government kind of sees it as, well, these people don't need to go get a job and they're not paying taxes into the system. They're not going to be self-employed. They're just going to continue being retired. So why do we need to give them a 10-year card? That being said, and it used to be a little bit more discretion, I think, than it is now. We'll see what happens in the future. Retailleau, who was the Minister of the Interior, who did a lot of the implementation of this new immigration law from January 2024, took care of it within the past couple months. He is now resigned. Then he was reappointed to his same job, and then the government resigned again this morning. So we will see what happens in terms of who gets that job next and how they choose to interpret, and do they choose to update any of these guidelines that they've been issuing. But that being said, if you're retired and the US tax treaty does not tax any of your US source income in France, you have to report it, but you don't actually pay tax on it. Unless you have very large amounts of passive income that are not pensions, you're typically not paying into the healthcare system either. If you're a UK citizen, your tax treaty is a little bit different. So typically you are paying income tax on most UK pensions, unless they're like government pensions or certain particular types of pensions. But you also have an S1 that is going to have the NHS cover your French healthcare. So you're not paying into the healthcare system either. Are non-citizens eligible for senior housing developments in France? So senior housing developments are mostly like retirement homes or EHPAD. We definitely have clients who have used those. We had clients who came with the husband's elderly mother who was 93, I think, at the time, and she was in an EHPAD for a while. But I mean, there's not really such thing. There's not like 65 plus communities in France like there are in the US that would be considered a legal age discrimination here. So that's not a thing that exists so much. Joan, we are still concerned about schooling for my granddaughter. Would other regions of France rather than Paris be better? I've been in touch with AEWE and joined, but although I love the group, have not received satisfactory answers or unfortunately negative answers. I mean, the thing about schooling is that every school is different and it's really hard to make any kinds of predictions. And a lot of times it's really difficult to know what's going on in your child's school here because it is not like in the US where parents have a lot of involvement in the school system. My son, his school that he was in before, trying to get information about what was going on in the class and what was going on in the school and everything, like there was nothing. There was no communication. There was no interest in sharing school life with the parents really very much at all. The school he's in now, which happens to be the school my husband teaches at, has a really stable long-term team that they work well together. They're nice people. They do activities, they go on field trips. I would say still there's not a ton of information coming home on what the kids did that day or a lot of parent involvement and activities in the class, but the ambience is a little bit more positive. But that really, I mean, it depends on the school. It's hard to say from one year to the next because teachers can move around. I mean, when I went to elementary school in the US, like we had two classrooms for each grade, and pretty much every single teacher was there for the entire time I was in elementary school, and a lot of them were still there in the same jobs when I graduated from high school. And that's just not a thing that happens in France. So it's really not possible to predict. We do have clients who have like really dived deep into research on particular schools and particular neighborhoods and who have restricted their apartment search to particular neighborhoods or arrondissements where they knew that their children would be in X school. But it's really impossible to know in advance until your child is there. Stephen, what should be included in your statement letter? Does it need to be handwritten? I guess I don't know what you mean by statement letter. I assume that you mean cover letter for your visa, in which case, no, it doesn't need to be handwritten. We typically have the clients write a little bit, or we help them to write a little bit about like their hobbies and what they're interested in France about and what they plan to do during their first year. And then we always, of course, include the line of, you know, we know that our visa type does not allow us to work and we don't plan on working. It doesn't need to be a novel. You don't need to overly explain, but just like, this is why I want to move to France. This is why I'm moving now. I plan on eating baguettes and training for that marathon in Bordeaux where you drink all the wine while you're running. I don't know, joining the local pétanque club. You can mention previous trips that you've taken to France and the areas that you visited and where you might want to end up, but you don't really need to overthink it. You just want to be careful, obviously, of not referring to anything like you might want to be working or looking for a job if your visa does not enable you to do that. Should you submit only savings and checking account statements and not IRA or brokerage accounts for proof of financial resources? 3 months worth. They do want 3 months worth of bank statements. It does not have to be all of your bank statements. So my recommendation is that you put the money that is needed for the visa application requirement into, one account and you give them one account. For a visitor visa, they are looking for the equivalent of 1,500 euros per month times 12. So like 18,000 euros ish. That is 1 year of net minimum wage. It's not really per person. It's technically good for two people, but if you have two or more people, you should have a little bit more than the minimum. And you should include bank statements with each family member's application, and you should make sure that it's an account. If you're applying with your spouse, make sure it's in a joint account so you can both use the same bank statements. Lisa, how far in advance of arrival should we secure initial lodging? If we plan to arrive in early March, spend a few days in Paris decompressing, then drive to destination, do we line up stays a month in advance, 3 months, 6 months? Like I said, usually I recommend arriving with an Airbnb for six-ish weeks is typically ideal. And you want to show that reservation with your visa application. So I would say reserve your Paris hotel, reserve your 6-ish weeks Airbnb. If you're arriving in early March, that's not yet the peak of tourist season. You might not need to reserve it 6 months in advance, but you should definitely reserve it long enough in advance that you have the reservation for your visa and the price doesn't go up or places don't get fully booked up. In the US, some Airbnb proprietors will cancel at the last minute, leaving travelers stranded for no apparent reason. Is this a typical occurrence in France, or should we feel more secure? I think that's an Airbnb platform problem. I do not use Airbnb, and that is one of the many reasons that I am anti Airbnb for my personal use. That being said, it is one of the places where it's really convenient to book something for 4 to 6 weeks. I can't really say in terms of percentages of canceling last minute here versus in the US. One solution that some of our clients had found that we found to be very good was something called Apart Hotel. And they were able to book, I think they booked like either 2 months or 90 days, and then all they had to do was give one week's notice to move out. And it's a hotel chain that's part of, it might even be part of the Accor group. So they found that that was really useful because once they found their long-term lease, all they had to do was give notice a week in advance so that they weren't paying beyond the date that they were moving into their rental property. Grace, what happens when you have medical visits, hospital testing, etc. before I have applied or have my carte vitale? I've been here 3 months. I went to my village doctor who did an exam, paid 30 euros. They may send me to the hospital for further testing. So if you've already applied to the healthcare system and you need healthcare, then your healthcare is going to begin from the time that your application is accepted. So eventually, when you receive your attestation des droits in the mail, proving that you are covered by the French system, it will have a start date on it, and that is the date from which you can send any of your receipts. If you have not yet applied for the French healthcare system, you want to check first with your temporary insurance policy to see if they will cover any of these things. Your mileage may vary. Typically in France, what I tell clients is that most of the time, the amount that you could pay for a policy that would cover any and all French healthcare expenses, even the the so-called non-urgent ones, the amount of money that you would pay for that policy was probably going to be equal to or greater than the amount that you would actually pay directly to the French hospital. So it's a requirement for doctors and for medical professionals to say whether they're conventionné. So if they're sector one, then they're going to be charging the base social security rates, which are very low. And you can look up online what the rates for each type of, procedure, test, medicine, whatever, what those are. If they're sector two or three, or like non conventionné, then they can charge higher rates and they are reimbursed less by the healthcare system, but still they should tell you what those things are before they charge you. Cynthia, does the French government recognize a long-term partner with an official common law marriage or domestic partner status as a spouse for purposes of being included in the passport talent application? No. Legally married is best. If you're in a registered domestic partnership that's similar to the PACS, it kind of depends on how long you've been together. If you're paxed to a French person, that only impacts your visa type after being paxed for 12 months, being paxed and living together for 12 months. Kelly, I didn't need my birth certificate for the visa application appointment. Correct. You do not need a you do not need a birth certificate for the visa application. It is not on the document list. We occasionally tell people to have it with them because very rarely some rogue TLS person will ask for it, but it may be required for renewal. It will definitely be required for registration into the healthcare system. I don't have the ability to get a long form birth certificate due to being adopted from South Korea and naturalized in the US. Is a US naturalization certificate with an apostille accepted in France? Probably. There are definitely people who do not have easily obtainable birth certificates who manage to live in France and get on the French healthcare system. So that is what I would try first. I would also probably err on the side of having a notarized document saying that your birth certificate is not obtainable and including that naturalization certificate with it. Okay. Kavita, please suggest French visa citizenship. I don't know what that means. There are 30 different visa types, roughly, that are covered in foolproof French visas. Not all of them lead to citizenship, so you should read the book if you have not already to figure out one, what visa types can potentially apply to you, and two, do you have a path to citizenship or what might your path to citizenship be on each of those visa types. To give you an overview, there's one option for applying for French citizenship if you are married to a French person. The other option is going to be if you are living in France for more than 5 years, you are going to show typically 18 months or more of a CDI, so a long-term work contract. They probably want 3 years at this point of CDD if you have a short-term or temporary work contract and you haven't gotten a long-term renewable or extended contract. They're going to want to see 3 consecutive years of being continuously or almost continuously employed, earning more than minimum wage, etc. If you're self-employed, it's 3 years of being paid at least French minimum wage from your business activity. So if you're a micro entrepreneur, 3 years of income declaration showing you've made more than French minimum wage each year. If you have a company like me that you have either salary or dividends or things like that coming from the company where you've been paying yourself at least French minimum wage, again for 3 years. Alice, I'm moving to Toulon in December. I work remotely in Canada. Can I set up my business online or do I need to do it in person? Yes, you can register your business online. It is done through the INP website, so you can register your micro entrepreneur activity there. Do I need to register at the prefecture since I will be a new resident? So first you need to get your visa in order to be a freelancer. So you will need to get a profession libérale visa. Then when you arrive, you need to find long-term housing, validate your visa at an address where you can get mail and have bills in your name, like your electricity bill, your internet bill, etc. Once you do that, then you will need to validate your visa and then you can register your business online. Mo, what U.S. banks have established international clients to be able to openly and legally maintain a U.S. account while being a tax resident of France? So I am a board member of ARO, which is the Association of Americans Resident Overseas. It's an organization that was founded in 1973 to advocate for the rights of Americans living outside of the US. They do advocacy work on issues like taxes, banking, voting, citizenship. It used to be that if a woman married a French citizen, she automatically got a French passport and lost her US citizenship and could not transmit US citizenship to her children. All that to say, one of its new membership benefits is that it has a relationship with a bank called the State Department Federal Credit Union, which means that if you are a member of Arrow, you can register to have an SDFCU account. Now, I have one. I opened it a year and a half or so ago through actually a different organization. And so I'm allowed to have a US account with the SDFCU, and I have an app. I receive, totally on the up and up. They have my French address. I receive everything here. The only thing that you can't do is they use like Zelle and things like that. You can't use Zelle if you're not in the US. When I'm in the US, I switch the address to my parents' address so that I can use it. You also, you can't have stocks and invest in mutual funds and things like that through them if you're not living in the US. But they're really good for just regular banking. Amy, what's the best way to search for full-time jobs in Paris when you don't speak fluent French? Well, my first recommendation would be to learn French. The job market is really tough right now, everywhere for everybody. It's always been tough for people who do not speak French or who have limited French. It's even harder right now. So It's unclear from your question whether or not you're looking for a job that will get you a visa, in which case you need to target large international companies that will not have a problem hiring you or sponsoring you from another country. Even if that is the case, it can be really tricky because a lot of offices, even if they say they want a native English speaker, it can still be that a lot of the communication is in French. A lot of the team's work might be in French. You could be a little bit excluded if you're not speaking French with the rest of the team. But again, that's really hard to say based on the company. I will say there's this woman on Instagram. Her name is, let me look it up because she's Russian, and so her name has many syllables. Her company is called Tell Me Panda, and her name is, I'm gonna put it in the chat for you. Sarah Nova. I am sure that I have butchered that, and apologies to her. Her Instagram account. So she is a graduate of one of France's big Grande École, which is what makes it easiest to get recruited from a foreign company. And her Instagram and her company they're kind of similar to what we do, except hers is really geared towards understanding the French job market if you want to find employment as a foreigner or particularly a foreign student in France. So she helps people get into these schools where they're going to be able to get good jobs and navigate the French job market to get hired. So I would highly recommend if you do want to look for employment in France, follow her, understand what is required for getting sponsored from foolproof French visas, but also what's going to make your CV stick out to a recruiter or to a hiring manager in France, even if you do not already have a visa. All right, we have a little bit more time, so I'm just going to take a quick look at the questions in the chat. Amy, how much additional income do we need to show for one minor child moving with a parent to Paris? So if it's one adult and one child, then the minimum visa requirement of 1,500 euros per month times 12 is going to be fine. That's technically an appropriate amount for up to a family of three, up to two adults and one child. I do recommend having more because that is not going to be enough to live on, but in terms of visa application, that's going to be fine. Kionda, are you yet seeing an average turnaround time for the business plan approvals for the Profession Libérale? So business Profession Libérale visas are being processed as normal. They are still getting turned around in typically 7 to 10 days. So that's fine. Any downside to arriving before the end of the year as an auto entrepreneur, thinking tax residency, pros and cons? I'm pursuing a Profession Libérale visa as a consultant. So typically, when people arrive in November, December, typically what we're advising, like I said, is getting the 4 to 6 week Airbnb and or temporary housing and using that time to find a long-term address. Now, when that happens and people end up finding their housing sometime in the beginning of December, often what we'll do is we'll say, hey, we're just going to register your business starting January 1st, and that makes it really clean. You don't have to do that. But obviously, if you have a partial year or a month and a half of French business income to report on your US taxes, it's just kind of annoying. So up to you, but you can absolutely you can absolutely get here in, November, December, and then just register your business starting in January. If I'm here as a PhD researcher on the scientifique chercheur visa and I publish a piece of writing and I'm paid for it, would that jeopardize my status? Well, no, but it kind of depends on how you're paid because you need to figure out, like, if you're being self-employed as a freelance writer, then you need to be registered with a business activity of freelance writer and declare that income. Okay, so going back to the questions in the chat, does that also apply to UK property? I assume this was the question about selling the property in a year, and if that was the case, then yes, it doesn't matter where the property is located outside of France, but it's selling it within the first year that matters. Sally, how far ahead of time should you plan if your goal is to relocate to France permanently? I'm just beginning my research and expect to move in about a year. Yeah, so you're right on time. I mean, a lot of people start planning about a year in advance when you want to start the visa application process or hire us depends a little bit on your visa type and your eventual move date. So I'm actually working on putting together videos for our sort of client profiles in terms of visitor, passeport talent, profession libérale, etc., and how long in advance you should start the process. Typically, what we're advising is 3 to 4 months for retirement or family visas, 4 to 6 months for profession artistique or profession libérale, and then 6 to 8 months for passport talent entrepreneur. That being said, we do have clients who start working with us a year in advance. That's pretty much the limit. Like we just had clients who signed up over the summer who want to move in June, and I told them like I don't want you signing up like much more than a year in advance because then, like plans change and sometimes move dates get pushed back and it can just cause problems if people don't end up having their timeline fully worked out. So it's important to not start too early, but up to a year for a business is typically the sweet spot. Can you put together the best websites for purchasing an apartment in Paris or suggest a place to find those? So it depends on what type of apartment that you want to look for. Se Loger is a site with a lot of listings. Le Bon Coin, Particulier à Particulier, that's where you're going to see a lot of real estate agency listings. Other than that, there's no multiple listing service in France, so you really can't just go and look at all of the different apartments that are available. If you're looking for something specific, I would recommend potentially talking to a buyer's agent who can look for, what you're looking for. So that would be a person who works for you as the buyer. You sign something called a mandat de recherche, and that says, I'm looking for 2 bedrooms in the eighth or the ninth in a Haussmannian building, not on the ground floor, has a balcony, has an elevator, whatever. And then that person will then look for apartments that meet your criteria and show you those. Now, the reason that can be a good idea is because one, they can go around to all the agencies for you. A lot of times they have connections with notaires or the local mairie where they can find properties that aren't listed or find things before they hit the market. And typically their commission is going to be in the 3% range. So you pay them when you purchase the property. They get paid for the result of finding you a place and you signing an active vente. Yes, these Q&As will be edited sometime this week and posted on YouTube. What if you have a French spouse? What if you have a French spouse? If you have a French spouse, then you can apply for the visa as the spouse of a French citizen. In order to do that, you have to have registered your marriage in France. So if you got married in France, then you got a marriage certificate from the mairie and you got a livret de famille. And you can order an updated marriage certificate from the town hall of the town where you got married. I think most of the time it's done online now anyway. And give that less than 3 months old along with a copy of your livret de famille as part of the visa application process. Now, if you got married in the States or if you got married outside of France, then hopefully you did this at the time of your marriage, which is you filed the marriage certificate or the registration of the marriage with the French consulate for the jurisdiction where you got married. So, like, I got married to my French husband in Boston, and we had to go to the Boston consulate and give them like our birth certificates and our proof of residence and our IDs and all of these things. And then they registered the marriage with the Service d'État Civil in Nantes. And then we got a transcription of the marriage certificate, and which is basically them writing the foreign marriage certificate into the French system in Nantes. And we also got a livret de famille. So if you got married and your French spouse did that, great. If you did not do that, then you need to do that before you start the visa process. And typically it's going to take about 8 weeks. Chloe, do people tend to have private healthcare in France to top up the government healthcare? Yes, most people in France have a mutuelle and you pay for it monthly, and then it covers anything that, or a lot of things that the regular French healthcare system doesn't cover. And then there's different levels. Like you can have a really basic one, and then you can have one that will like pay for all the bells and whistles on your glasses and, a private room at the hospital and reimburse you more for prescriptions or sessions or acupuncture. So there's probably hundreds of different mutuelles, and you can get a couple of quotes after you're on the French healthcare system. Dina, I am a dual French American citizen married to an American. What kind of visa should he apply for? Will he be eligible for health care through French Social Security, or would his Medicare continue to cover him in France? So he should apply as the spouse of a French citizen, which I just mentioned, and make sure that you registered your marriage with the French consulate. If he is not working when he arrives, then he will be eligible to register on the French healthcare system after 3 months. Medicare does not currently cover people outside of the US. Unfortunately, that will not be a good option. Charlotte, if those in a visitor's visa with no income originating in France probably can't get a 10-year card, are they stuck with renewing every year? Pretty much. The renewal process for the visitor visa is done mostly online. You really just have to go to the prefecture to pick up the new card every year. And yeah, I mean, it's going to have to be done every year unless they change their mind on that. I can't predict what will happen in the next 5 years. I will say that if you want to eventually request a 10-year card, it doesn't hurt to ask. You want to make sure that you file taxes every year starting from when you arrive. You want to make sure that you are learning French. Theoretically, people who are over 65 are going to be exempt from the language requirements of having a B1 level of French for the 10-year card, but it would probably still be a good idea to get that if you can and include the language certificate when you're doing your fifth renewal. And you can always ask for it. The worst they can do is say no and just continue to give you a 1-year card. I was born in the Netherlands and my birth certificate is in Dutch. Do I need to get it translated? No, but you can get a multilingual birth certificate from the Netherlands. Typically, documents issued by the EU do not need to be translated for other EU member states. If one already has a master's degree, is it possible to apply for a second one in France? Two masters are fairly common in the US, but seems to vary in my research on Europe. So it's possible. The thing that you have to be careful of, especially if you're going through Campus France and wanting to get a student visa, is that typically the French government wants you to be learning French or doing a program for professional reasons if they're going to give you a student visa. So I've seen it happen that students who've already had like a master's or a PhD get rejected for student visas because, they couldn't show that the program was going to be related to their academic or professional path. They already had a PhD and had learned some French and then or had learned a different language and then were trying to get a student visa for a beginning French class, things like that. So you do have to be a little bit careful because they're not necessarily just going to give you a student visa only because you enroll in a program. So you really are going to have to like explain and justify why this program, why France, what does it get you in order to get accepted by the program and get a student visa. What was the website to register a business online? INPI. The Institut National de la Propriété Intellectuelle. It is where all business things are done. What happens if I leave France before receiving my carte de séjour? We applied on September 30th and the temporary visa expires mid-November. I need to go back to the US in December for holidays and year-end client planning meetings. So officially nothing happens. I mean, the thing is, so right now, carte de séjour renewals, applications, whatever, all take weeks, if not months. That is totally normal. It is very normal to not get your renewal process, not get an extension or whatever before whatever document you currently have expires. For Americans, it has not historically been a problem to leave and come back to France as long as you've had some type of proof that something's been submitted. And the people at the border generally are understanding. We've had a lot of clients who've had their renewals delayed for months. One was 359 days between being submitted and getting some kind of reply. And then in that case, they know at the border that the whole system is a mess right now, basically. That being said, the EU is now, as of October 12th, going to be implementing the entry exit system or start implementing the entry exit system or EES. This means that instead of showing your passport, having them flip through everything and having a stamp, they are going to just scan your passport and keep track of you entering and exiting France at the border. The idea is that they're going to keep track of people who are overstaying. Now, technically, you are not overstaying or committing any sort of like infraction if you have a renewal or request or something in progress. I do not expect for now, that there's going to be issues with travel. At some point, They're going to also implement something called the ETS, the European Travel Information and Authorization System, which is similar to the ESTA or the ETA in the UK. And it's basically paying to have your name run through Interpol to see if you're a criminal before you get authorized to enter the EU. Also, not a big deal. My concern eventually is that if people are trying to travel in and out of France on expired documents, then they will be asked for this EES or that the airline or ETS, and that the airlines will start asking for it and denying boarding if you don't have departure plans within 90 days. So I am not anticipating problems before the end of the year. I don't know if they're going to scan your passport if you show them, like, hey, I submitted my carte de séjour request, but they haven't validated it yet. They're not supposed to be doing this for people who are residing in the EU. But again, we don't know yet how it's going to be implemented. It also depends a little bit on how much scarier the world can get in the next couple months. So, yeah, I'm really unclear on how this is all going to work. It's also theoretically starting to be implemented on October 12th, but it's not, but it's only at certain places. So it will probably be, it could be another year or more before it's fully implemented across the board. So we'll see. I will say that historically, my advice to people who have overstayed is that if you have overstayed, you want to fly in and out of France directly to your home country and go through French border control because, like I said, they're aware of the issues with the documents and things taking a long time to be processed and all of that. So you're less likely to have a problem than, for example, if you go through Germany, where they like to follow the rules and they're very good about issuing their documents in a timely manner. So they don't necessarily have the same understanding of how the process might work in France. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit up in the air in terms of how it goes, but historically, we have never had people have a problem who are Americans or Brits going into and out of France. Even if they have a carte de séjour request in progress, they don't have a prolongation or a récépissé or some type of extension document for their visa that's expiring because of paperwork issues. But we'll see what happens. All right, final question. On average, how quickly are vie privée visas for spouses of French citizens approved? Typically within 7 days. So I would recommend like making your visa appointment usually about 3 or so weeks in advance before you want to have the appointment, unless you're applying in the summer, in which case you want to have a little bit more lead time. And then I always advise people leave a month between your visa appointment and and your departure date. Most of the time, you're going to get your visa back in like 8 calendar days. It's not really that long, especially if you've already done all of the paperwork and everything like that. But you always want to have a little bit of a buffer. All right, so if you have not yet read Foolproof French Visas and you need to understand the requirements for a particular visa type, what your paths to residency and naturalization are, like all of those things, what your long-term plans are for living in France, definitely check it out. I've given you the link there. If you would like to schedule a 1 hour consultation with me to go through like your timeline, what visa options are appropriate for you, and answer all of your personal questions about your relocation to France, you can schedule a consultation with me here. And finally, if you do want to check out our service packages because you're considering working with us on your relocation, you can take a look here and request a proposal from us, and that will help us to give you a custom quote based on the visa type, the number of people in your family, whether or not your driver's license is exchangeable, all of those kinds of things that we would potentially be doing for you as part of the package. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to open up those links if you need, and then we're going to call it a night. All right. Thank you so much. The next Q&A session is going to be on Monday, November 3rd. If you got the reminders for this one, you will also get the reminders for the next one and be able to submit your questions a few days in advance. So again, thank you so much for joining me, and I will hopefully see you next month. Yes, this Q&A will be slightly edited and posted on YouTube. Normally we do it within a couple of days, so look out for that on our YouTube channel, which is at Your Transformation. All right, thank you. Have a good rest of your evening and see you in November. Goodbye.